Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. Live in the studio with me today, I have Catrina Guttery. Catrina is an on-air personality for legendary Memphis radio station WEGR-Rock 103 and serves as host and producer of the radio station's local music program, Memphis Made, every Sunday. Previously, she was an artist manager for CG Music Management and business and artist relations manager at the Memphis Music Foundation. Catrina, thanks for joining me today.
Wow, thanks for having me. What a great intro. Hope I can live up to that.
Well, it's exciting to have you here. I know, you do your own program all the time, so this is really neat. So I know you've been involved in the music industry for a long time. Mm-hmm. When did you first get involved and what spurred you to get into music?
I've always been a die-hard music fan. I talked about this recently in another interview, but my cousin, I grew up in Byhalia, Mississippi, but I had a cousin that ushered at the Mid-South Coliseum back in the day. This was probably in the late 80s, early 90s. And she used to sneak me into shows at the Mid-South Coliseum.
Oh, that's fun.
So I saw everyone from Alabama to, Cinderella to lots of heavy acts there that probably defined my musical taste to this very day. Eventually in high school, I ended up finding the bass. And although it was just sort of a hobby back then as well, I ended up putting it down and not picking it up until several years ago. But I've just always been a diehard music fan. It was an escape growing up in Byhalia, Mississippi. You didn't really have a whole lot else to do other than just sort of listen to tunes and, bury yourself in the music that you love. So for me, it goes all the way back to my, junior high and high school years, just loving music.
Oh, that's great. And so how did you learn to play the bass? Was it in school or was it on your own?
Well, let me say this. I'm still learning to play the bass. Okay. But actually, I started playing piano. My mother insisted that I take piano lessons with one of her friends in the Baptist church I was going to there in Byhalia. So although I really never mastered the piano, it's just the bass was something that I was always drawn to. My grandmother actually always joked with me and said that she thought that I was always going to be a football player because my voice is so deep.
Oh, no.
So that always made an impact on me. And also, not just that, but also I used to crank, obviously I mentioned I was a diehard music fan and still am, especially heavier music. I used to always crank my tunes up in my bedroom, and my mother would constantly come to the door of my room and say, "You've got to turn the bass down on your stereo. It's driving me crazy." And I think for some strange reason, between my grandmother and my mother, that's why I gravitated towards the bass. It just, those deeper, lower tones always resonated with me for sure.
Oh, that's funny. Well, speaking of your voice, you're now an on-air personality, as we've mentioned. How long have you been doing that for?
A little over 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually worked for a local nonprofit, Memphis Music Foundation. I started there, and I worked in artist development with a lot of different local artists there. We were a local nonprofit that helped musicians grow their music business, and I was the artist relations and business manager there. So I would sit down with local artists and help them sort of put together a short and long-term goals and plans for whatever it was they were wanting to accomplish in the music industry. So I say all that to say that knowing so many local bands, Rock 103 came into the Music Resource Center, the Music Foundation, looking for someone to report the local Memphis music news.
Oh, interesting.
Every Sunday night. And somehow, amazing how that happens, I volunteered to do it because I was, working on the front lines with the artist. and my boss said, you have a really good voice, and you know a lot about local Memphis music. I'd really like to show you the ropes.
Oh,
and that's
wow.
how I started my broadcasting career.
That's exciting. So you mentioned too that you were involved in artist development. You helped artists at the Music Foundation to sort of plot their careers out.
Sure.
Does that mean that you helped them figure out what to do with regards to marketing or?
A little bit of everything across the board. Everything from marketing to booking shows to, social media, which ties into the marketing part. Sitting down with the artist and finding out what it was they were wanting to accomplish. Mostly what I did was help people put out releases.
Oh, interesting.
So on the local level.
Yeah.
Sometimes regionally as well, but we're a local nonprofit, so we were focused more on that local level, although regional and national was very important as well. So,
oh, that's really interesting. So, do most artists, and I'm not super familiar with the music industry, do most artists do their own marketing? I mean, especially when they're starting out, or how does that work?
Well, in this day and age, they do. It's such a DIY, do-it-yourself, independent world these days that, you pretty much have to be hands-on and involved in every part of the planning and implementation as an artist these days. That's very important. I mean, it's good to have help, and it's great to have a team, but you definitely need to be involved as the artist. Because, there's so many artists and bands out there today competing for everyone's attention, especially via social media and online platforms. So it's very important to be involved in all of the planning and implementation if you're an artist, solo artist or band or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I can only imagine. It's a lot. I'm sure it's like being an entrepreneur. It's kind of like having your own business.
It is, for sure. And I think that's what one of my goals was there at the Music Foundation and the Music Resource Center, was to get artists to understand that they should treat their band as a business.
Yeah.
Because that's a very important part of...
It's like a brand.
It is, for sure.
So back to your radio show. So... when I picture radio, since I don't know a ton about it, I almost picture that you just get to show up and you just show up and you talk.
Right.
But I bet there's more that goes into it. I mean, what are some of the pieces that we don't see that are going on that you're doing?
Well, first of all, I produce my entire show. So from the recording to the, booking the bands to going out and seeing the bands, it has to be a band. I think for my show, you have to have a release, at least an EP, because we are a vehicle to turn on the local listener that might not traditionally be a Memphis music fan. We are a vehicle to get local bands' music out.
Oh, that's great.
So it's very important for me to obviously do all of the planning and to go out and see bands, and that's a very important part of it as well. But yeah, from putting together, doing the research on the band to putting the questions together and having them, booking them for the show, pretty much do it all, and learning the board. I've had to do that.
When you say the board, do you mean
recording my show? Actually,
okay.
Yeah. So it's been. I'm still learning actually, but trial by fire, I like to say. But it's been great.
So is that new for you? All those.
Oh yeah,
learning
for
to
sure.
Record it? Okay,
yeah,
cool.
Yeah, for sure. It's been challenging but rewarding all the same.
Oh, that's cool. So I mentioned in the intro that in your previous career, you also managed artists at your company, CG Music Management. And was it similar to what you were doing at the Music Foundation? Was it different? What does an artist manager do?
Probably the better question is, what does an artist manager not do?
Oh, wow.
Let me clarify too. I went back to school in 2004 to the University of Memphis to complete my bachelor's degree. I knew that I wanted to pursue some kind of a career in the music industry.
Okay.
I just wasn't quite sure what I wanted to go after. And through the university college at the University of Memphis, I was able to create an entertainment management degree.
Oh, wow. So that didn't exist.
It didn't exist.
Created that. Okay.
And so you actually have to put together the course, the curriculum, and get it approved through the university.
Yeah.
It was a fast way for me to learn a lot about the music industry and get through school. And artist management was just a way for me to learn all of those different arms of working with a band, like booking and PR and, the management aspect. And, I've even roadied for bands. So with being an artist manager, you're sort of jack of all trades, master of none. I always like to say you just never know when things are going to change, and when you have to be on call 24/7. So the University of Memphis really helped me in that regard. It trained me. It gave me a lot of hands-on experience, especially with their artist management class under the direction of Professor Tanya Butler. She is no longer there. But she actually gave me a lot of great advice and great experience in artist management there.
Oh, that's great. Now, do they have that as a degree now? Do other people study
I don't
artist management?
think that there's an entertainment management degree there per se, but if someone was interested in seeing what I did, obviously I graduated in 2006, so times in the climate of the music industry has changed a lot since then, but they can actually go to the university college and find on file where I put together the curriculum and the program for entertainment management.
I think that would be such a good degree for them to add, especially for Memphis.
Yeah, for sure. The problem sometimes with entertainment management is that with being an artist manager is that you have to take on a lot of artists to make a sustainable living.
Oh, really? What's a lot of artists? Like how many?
Well, yeah, I should say a lot. I guess it's relative to the artist and where they are in their career as well. But for me in the beginning, it was just 2 or 3 artists, but I do know artist managers who eventually they grow and become a firm and take on 15, 20 artists at a time. So for me, by myself, it was hard to really do a whole lot more than a couple of artists at a time, but it can be challenging to be an artist manager for sure. But it was very rewarding for me because it allowed me to get a lot of different experience in the music industry.
That's interesting. It reminds me a little bit in my mind of advertising agencies.
Yes.
You represent a lot of clients, and part of it is to help mitigate your risk so that if one of your clients goes out of business or goes to another place, to get help and is no longer your client, you don't lose all your money. So it's kind of to help ensure you'll always have that revenue stream and have a paycheck.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is a lot like that. And I don't discount. I mean, we definitely do need, I think, more artist managers, especially on the local level. The thing is that you don't have to have a degree to become an artist manager.
Okay.
Typically what happens is usually someone that's a friend of the band or the artist just takes on the responsibility of handling some of the band business, which is great until it comes to more of the legal side of artist management. And I think that is the sign of a person that will do well in artist management is realizing their strengths and weaknesses, just like with any other career, realizing when is the best time to add to the team, like an attorney or a publicist or whatever the case may be. Sometimes if it's an incredible artist who's working really hard, the artist career can grow really quickly and sometimes outgrow the artist manager.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so sometimes I think that you just have to be very aware of what your strengths and weaknesses are and just be prepared to, add to the team and grow yourself in order to help the artist.
Well, I like that you mentioned that you don't necessarily have to have a certain degree to get into this. I think that holds true with a lot of careers. I do think, though, it is important to have some kind of a degree.
Absolutely.
Because I do sometimes work with clients who later in their career, they want to switch careers and they realize, wow, I never finished my bachelor's degree. I feel really helpless right now because I'm going out and I'm interviewing for something brand new and I'm not able to compete with, other candidates. So I don't often think it matters exactly what your degree is in, but that you complete school. I think that is an important component. But so in your case, though, the way that you transitioned into sort of the music industry, was it mainly through going back to school, or were there other pieces to it?
There were other pieces before that. I learned a lot, actually. I learned a lot from a friend or from a boyfriend, actually, who was in a band by observing a lot of the things that were going on around his band at the time.
Okay.
And I sort of learned a lot through his band, the mistakes they made and the great things that they did as well. And I was always just inspired by it. I was like, I can do that. This seems easy,
Yeah.
I can email a local newspaper and put out the word about the show. They're just easy things like that. So that always appealed to me. And then for some strange reason, I don't know, I just worked long enough in property management to know that I enjoyed getting to know this side of the business, but it wasn't what I was passionate about. And I think that is, to me, the biggest advice for anyone that decides to have a career in the music industry, is that it is going to be it has to be fueled by passion, because for the most part, most people that work in this industry do not make a ton of money, and that's the truth of the matter. But my journey music has always allowed me to make a living and to a sustainable living, but I remain passionate about what I do. And to me in life, that's much more important than anything else. Having that, enjoying what you do with your career is most important, very important.
I think your point about having worked in property management is really interesting, because you probably learned things there that you use today.
Oh, yeah.
But most people wouldn't think about that because there's such different industries, like on the surface.
Yeah.
But that applies on a lot of cases where someone wants to switch industries. They may be doing something today, they probably are in their current job, that would totally apply to a job in a different industry, and they could really use. I think one issue, though, I see sometimes with clients, I mentioned this before we got started, but is sometimes I'll have someone come in that's been working in corporate for a really long time, and they'll say, gosh, I really want to work in the music industry, for example. And, I think I can do it, and I've never done it before, but I'm totally prepared. But the only thing is, I've been making, 6 figures at my corporate job, and my only requirement is I have to continue to make 6 figures at this new job. But it sounds like, based on what you're saying, that might not be realistic.
Well, from not to crush anyone's dreams, but from a realistic standpoint, viewpoint, I for me, what's worked is, the opposite. I feel like that with what I do, I don't make a ton of money, but for me, it's never been about that.
Right.
So I guess maybe, the reverse, I have the reverse situation. I just feel like I make a comfortable living and I'm not really driven by money. So for me, but someone else's journey may be different. But,
sure.
But for me, I always joke with my husband that and he knows this, I'm not very high maintenance. So I don't really, which allows me to work in the music industry and make a living. Yeah.
I think it's all about priorities.
Yeah, for sure.
You decide what's really important to you and you go with it. And you can't always have everything. You can't always have the job that you love, making the most amount of money possible, in the perfect location, for the perfect boss. Like, you can get some of those things. Yeah. But you can't always get all of them at the exact same time.
Right. Absolutely.
So I think it comes down to being kind of realistic. So for people who are aspiring musicians, because especially in Memphis, I know a lot of people who they work in a regular job, but they're also in a band.
Yeah.
Like, it's amazing here how many people play music on the side. What advice would you have for someone that is an aspiring musician that really wants to get, into the field?
Well, it's no surprise that there are so many people, aspiring musicians in Memphis, because we're a breeding ground for, music. We're known all over the world for our music, Stax, Sun, Graceland, Ardent. The list goes on and on. But I just think that it has to be fueled by your passion. Mm-hmm. It can't be, like you mentioned earlier, your priorities have to be, and your goals have to be realistic as well. I always tell people that it was really hard for me to work with so many musicians and not be inspired to pick my bass back up. And that's what happened with me at the Music Foundation. Mm-hmm. I was sitting there being creatively inspired by musicians every day that would come through our door. And let me just say this too, the music industry has changed so much, especially over the last 10 years, that there is no certain path to career success in today's music industry. Mm-hmm. You have to be very creative, and you have to be hands-on, and you have to be, now is the time that you have to work harder than ever to become successful. But successful is relative to the artist too. Are they trying to be on, are they trying to win a Grammy, or are they trying to just put out an EP locally? Mm-hmm. Those are both two important components of what you're doing as an artist. But I think that it's, my advice to aspiring musicians would be just to know what you're getting into, and to remember that it's still all about the songwriting. And good songs are very important.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So when you look at how long it takes artists to become known or to become successful, I would imagine that a lot of people, they just want it to just work really quickly. Yeah. Is it a quick thing, or how long does it usually take?
Oh, there's no certain time. I think of, I have conversations every week with James Alexander from the Bar-Kays, legendary Stax. The Bar-Kays were Otis Redding's backup band. And James is still out there doing it 50 years later, and still talking about the struggles within the music industry. They are real, and it's just like any other job. It looks sexy because it's the music industry, but it's still a career, and it's still competitive, and today even more so than ever, especially because of social media. You have to compete with everyone else for their attention. And everyone's giving away their music these days, so you have to be creative about how you're going to make money as well. Right.
No, I could see that. I could see that. And it's interesting because by the time I would see a musician on television for the first time, it would feel like, wow, they're brand new, but they've probably been playing music for years before they got on national television.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of Malcolm Gladwell, the author.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know if you read his book, Outliers, but he talks a little bit about the Beatles and the Outliers, and he talks about how they played for, his theory is like 10,000 hours to get really good. Sure. And that's kind of before they became well-known. And then after the 10,000 hours, they were suddenly like this new famous band.
But the average music fan doesn't really know what all goes into becoming that band on that level.
Right.
Not diminishing the fact that they're a fan, and a lot of people don't want to know what's behind the scenes too, because it is sexier if you just see the band on a stage. They hit the stage and they play a show and they make you feel good for 2 hours and then they leave. What the average music fan doesn't know is that 10 guys, including the band and their roadies, have to go load up in a van and just, wonder if they're going to make enough money to get from point A to point B. There's a lot of struggle that goes on behind the scenes, in the music industry, and it's still real. There are tons of bands still out there doing that today. But I think that struggle is important to defining, separating the musicians who are serious and not serious. Some people are just hobbyists, and that's fine too. But if you're trying to make a professional living, being a musician, that struggle is important and it's still real.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I almost could think of it like any career. Any career takes a really long time to become very successful.
Right.
Like the CEO of a big corporation didn't just show up right out of college and become the CEO.
Yeah.
He started, as an entry-level person and maybe got promoted to a manager or a vice president. Like, it's a process.
Absolutely.
So by the time that you make it to the top of your game, you've really been playing for a long time.
Yeah.
So on the flip side, I occasionally will talk to people who have been in the music industry for years. And in my case, actually, my own mother studied voice in college.
Oh, nice.
And I grew up in Oklahoma, so there's not a whole lot of places to use a voice degree.
Yeah, right, sure.
In Oklahoma. But sometimes I talk to artists who have been in the music industry for a long time, and they've gotten to a place where they are ready to make a regular paycheck. Like, maybe they're getting older, maybe their priorities have changed and they want to have children or whatever the thing is. But they're kind of struggling to figure out, like, where do I begin?
Right.
Do you have advice for people that are going through that?
Well, what I've encountered here lately, my experiences with those people is that most of them somehow segue into teaching music. That seems... It fuels them creatively and passionately to see other people learning. Mm-hmm. So I think that's where a lot of those musicians sort of go with that. Not all of them, obviously, but I think that is definitely a very important piece of the component, truly learning and mastering instruments, and that's very important. So that's what I'm seeing these days with a lot of the professional musicians who are, tired of being road warriors and tired of dealing with the music industry. They're sort of going into the educational, side of things.
It's interesting that you say that. My mother went into teaching music.
Yeah.
After kind of struggling for a long time, I think, to figure things out. Another industry that I've kind of noticed that might work for some of these musicians is sales.
Yeah.
Because especially for the people who've been in a band where they have to speak and they have to go and talk to people, they sort of are groomed a little bit to be able to work with the public and to sort of sell themselves.
That's what they're doing all the time. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's, it's always interesting to me when I meet, of course, I work with a lot of heavier bands, in the heavier community, but who don't really like talking about themselves. But in general, that's very important for you to stay visible all of the time, especially mm-hmm. in today's music industry, because if you don't, someone else is going to swoop in and steal the limelight from you. So
I think there's some level of charisma that a lot of those artists have too. And I think it really just works well for sales or for anything where you're really working with customers and supporting customers. I think that's definitely another avenue that I would consider if teaching is maybe not exciting to the person. Yeah.
And, I was mentioning earlier before we started the interview, one of the things that I have to remind some of the bands that come in to interview on Memphis Made on Rock 103 mm-hmm. is that it's most important, the whole band can come, but it's most important that you send your most vocal people in the bands, because you are selling your band. You're telling people about what it is that makes your band special. So it's important to have, even if it's the keyboard player who doesn't seem like the most obvious person to sell the band, sometimes you'll find that, there are other important people in the band who can be that front person, the vocal piece for the band, and continue to spread the word about them,
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that made me think of is the Memphis Grizzlies, just randomly. I've been to events where the Grizzlies players are all there, mm-hmm. right? And they're maybe required to be there as part of their job. And it's super fun because you get to go and meet all the players. And a lot of them are super quiet, right? This is really freaky that they have to interact with a lot of people. But then there's a couple of the players who just come up and they shake your hand, they give you a hug, they take a photo, they're so well-spoken. Mm-hmm. And those are the ones that you always see on TV who talk to the news.
Right.
They have had this extra level of training.
Sure.
And it really makes a big difference.
Absolutely.
So when you said that, that's kind of
it's very important.
For me, that's definitely a great skill, whether you're in music or any other industry, if you're able to interact with people, to talk, to relate to people, it's so much easier to sell yourself.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Doing something else and really to keep up your network too.
Yeah.
Because I find a lot of people kind of put the blinders on and do their current job and don't expand their network. And then suddenly when you're without a job, you don't have anybody to turn to.
Yeah.
Which can be tough.
Well, and you touched on growing your network. In terms of me being at the station, I do a lot of volunteer work within the local Hispanic community here in Memphis. On the committee who has started the first, it's called the Centro Cultural Latino de Memphis. Mm-hmm. It's the first Latin cultural center in Memphis. And it is the only place in Memphis that you can go and learn the traditional art form of Aztec dance for free.
Wow.
And so I say that to say, and I also am on the committee for the Dia de los Muertos, which is the Day of the Dead celebration, but we work really hard to preserve the ancient art forms and culture within the Latin community. Mm-hmm. And that is very important. That's one of the reasons I will say that I was hired with Rock 103 is not only to do outreach to the music community, but the community as a whole.
Okay.
That's very important to our station.
Right.
We are a for-profit, but they understand iHeartMedia, mm-hmm. which used to be Clear Channel, but now mm-hmm. we are iHeartMedia, understands having that connection to the community that they're in. That's specifically why I was hired there, other than to host Memphis Made. And that's what I'm passionate about.
Yeah.
So that's what fuels me doing so much community work is that, I am Hispanic. So it just, resonates with me to go into the community and to help however I can. So that's what I'm passionate about as well. So
no, that's awesome. So how long have you been involved with those organizations?
The Centro Cultural, the Latin Cultural Center, has now been around for almost 5 years, I believe. So I've been there. I'm a founding member. And the Day of the Dead, I've been on that committee for the last 4 years.
Okay.
So, both of the Latin Cultural Center is fostered under Caritas Village mm-hmm. here in Memphis. They're amazing organizations here in Memphis that are just doing outreach to the community. It's not just to the Hispanic community, it's to the community as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Our classes are, hosted in both English and Spanish. So,
oh, great!
Yeah, so it's an amazing thing for everyone to see. We just hosted our first annual Tamale Festival, and we had
I saw that.
Yeah, we had over 1,500 people there. Mark Edgar Stewart played, as well as one of our local mariachi groups, female mariachis called Las Palomas. So yeah, we try to have diversity in what we do with the community, but I'm very passionate about doing outreach too.
So you said you've been working with the one group for 5 years, right? Mm-hmm. And you've been with Rock 103 for 3 years.
Right.
So my guess is that you did not get involved with these groups to get a job at Rock 103, right?
No. I got involved with those groups through the Memphis Music Foundation.
Because you're passionate about these
yes.
issues, right?
Yes.
I think that's just a really important takeaway. Oftentimes I will work with people who their only reason to want to get involved with a community group would be to get a new job.
Right.
And they want to get it right away.
Right.
Or they don't want to be involved. Mm-hmm. And that's really not how networking works. You want to find something that you're passionate about, something you want to do because you want to be there. And then through that activity, you build these connections, which you obviously did. Mm-hmm. And when you need those connections or when there's an opportunity, those people know who you are and they will come to you. Because my guess is, did someone approach you for the Rock 103 opportunity? I mean, you said you kind of talked about it at work.
Yes. Actually, Rock 103 came into the Music Foundation initially to... they wanted to find someone to report the local Memphis music news.
Right.
So I did that for almost a year before I came on as host and producer. But that sort of helped me learn the ropes and find my way through learning how to be a DJ, or we're called on-air personalities these days. But that's how I got my start there. But that was very important that I wasn't just thrown in to do it all. Mm-hmm. It was a process, and I loved it. And For me personally, it's just the journey that I'm allowing music to take me on.
Yes. You know, I actually wrote a note here as we were talking. The thing that really resonated with me is that you've had this openness through your career to try new things, to sort of take this path.
Absolutely.
And I've noticed that with a lot of people who've been really successful and do things that they love, they always seem to have this openness. They're willing to trust and try things. And if something doesn't quite work out, they're willing to try something different. I just think that's neat.
It's amazing how that works because with entertainment management, you're always behind the scenes. It took me a long time to transition to be I'm a DJ, so I'm very present at events and I'm the spokesperson for the station.
Right.
And it took me a long time to get through that part of, because public speaking is no one's favorite thing to do, but I have to do it, and I realized that at the end of the day, why I'm doing it is to put the spotlight on Memphis music, which is one of our cities, if not the best, our greatest asset here in Memphis. That's why we're known all over the world. So when I think of it in those terms, it just makes sense for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so one of the things that you mentioned as you were talking is that the radio station is a for-profit, and the Memphis Music Foundation, for example, is a nonprofit. Have there been noticeable differences between working for a for-profit and a nonprofit?
Well, not for me, because there's the local community piece, and that's why I was hired. I'm sure that there are differences to a lot of people.
Yeah.
But for me, my experience, there is to be connected and to do, the community outreach. And actually, I prefer that it stay on that, I hope that I continue to have that outlook with what I'm doing, because that's what fuels me passionately, as I mentioned earlier. So I'm sure there are differences, but for me, my journey has been certainly positive. So.
Well, I like that perspective a lot. You know, in my previous career, I was a digital marketer. I've worked in both nonprofit and for-profit, and people would get really wrapped up in that. And I would say, well, I promote your product or your brand online. That's what I do. It doesn't matter if you're a nonprofit or for-profit. I do the same thing.
Right.
So I like that perspective that you can see there's this continuity between those two sort of environments.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we've covered so many different topics. I don't know if there's any last thoughts that you might have for anyone who's out there struggling, trying to find their way to a new job.
Well, I just think being open-minded and continuing to remember that whatever it is that you're doing in life, not be fueled by your income. Obviously, we all have to make a living, but when you're passionate about something, it just all works out. In the end, it has for me anyway. Who knows where I'll go next? But the journey of, I'm constantly thanking my boss. I'm like, thanks for opening this door for me, because, it's allowing me to do something that I love. And that's one of the most important things in life. Go after something that fuels you creatively, passionately. I think that's where happiness comes from. It does for me anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a good story. So if anybody who's listening today wants to go and listen to your show, how can they do that?
Yeah, you can listen every Sunday night from 8 to 10 on Rock 103, which is 102.7 FM. You can also listen online at rock103.com and through the iHeartRadio smartphone app. That's available for both Android and iPhone. You can listen through there, and also you can if you have local Mid-South music. We don't just play Memphis music, Mid-South area music. You can upload tunes and get more information about the show at rock103.com/MemphisMade.
Oh, cool!
Yeah,
great.
So there's more information about the show there too, but. I love what I'm doing, and thank you for letting me have a little bit of your time to share, with folks.
Thank you for sharing your story. It's so inspiring. I really appreciate you coming down.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Angie.
Well, thanks everyone for listening Tune in next week for another edition of the Copeland Coaching Podcast. And if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher to make sure you never miss an episode.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Coaching Podcast today with your host, Angela Copeland. Tune in next time to get more great tips on turning your job search into a slam dunk.